Welcome to another special feature episode of American Rifleman Television. Right now, I'm standing at the site of the Bunker Hill Monument, which commemorates the Battle of Bunker Hill, fought here in June of 1775, 250 years ago. This was the site of fortifications that were erected by the massive army of militiamen that had gathered outside of the city of Boston, trapping the British inside of the city. By June of 1775, the British were determined to drive the colonists from this position and suffered some of the bloodiest losses that they took during the entirety of the American Revolution. We're going to talk about the events of that day, and we're going to look at the men who fought here and discuss the arms that they carried.
On the evening of April 19th, it starts with a few men coming in, and it grows and grows and grows. So by the end of the April 19th, you've got around maybe 4,000, 5,000 men who are there, who have followed the British back in to Boston and are in Cambridge and that surrounding area, Charlestown. At the time, what's now Somerville was part of Charlestown. So Charlestown wasn't just the neck and where Bunker and Breed's Hill was. It was a larger area than that. But there's troops that come in and stay the night in that area. By the next morning, there are thousands more. Within a couple of days, there's 23,000 troops that surround the British in Boston. That is a very impressive thing with no cell phones, no communications, other than riders spreading out through the countryside, getting to Connecticut, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and spreading the word.
Boston is quite the little city as far as the peninsulas and the way in and way out. Just try and navigate traffic into that place today. It's miserable. And back then, obviously the poem says, one if by land, two if by sea. There was only one land route out of that place. The colonists and the British basically came to the same conclusion at the same time, that the hills, Bunker and Breed's Hill, outside of Charleston, Massachusetts, just across the bay, were ideal for mounting artillery and shelling the city of Boston. And that would also put the Royal Navy at risk, which was at anchor there as well. They both kind of set out to capture those two hills almost at the same time.
One of the elements that is notable about the Siege of Boston is really how prepared the militia were in order to effect this siege. They had been gathering supplies, they had been outfitting and equipping themselves, and so they were in a position to be able to effect a sustained siege. However, it's not quite as cut and dry as all that, because one of the biggest limitations that they have is powder. And this is going to be a problem that plagues the American cause throughout the Revolution, is access to any kind of quantity of powder. Because black powder, in this era, not a ton of it is made in the colonies. There are very few powder mills. Most of it's coming in from Great Britain.
On the 15th of June, 1775, the Committee of Safety issues an order that we need to take Bunker Hill and hold it. They are thinking that the British are going to take that high piece of land, and they're not going to be able to push them out. So they order troops on the night of the 16th to build a breastwork on Bunker Hill. The only problem is it wasn't built on Bunker Hill, it was built on Breed's Hill. There's debate as to whether it should be called Bunker Hill or Breed's Hill, but there are people in the 19th century who said it's all part of the same rise, it doesn't matter. The man in charge of that is Colonel William Prescott from Pepperell, Mass. And he takes his men, and overnight they excavate a fairly crude fortification. In the morning, British ships realize what's going on, and they start cannonading the earthworks. But they also start firing hot shot and burn the town. The town of Charlestown starts to burn. And then they send in their infantry. And it's really ugly. The Americans are firing down on these approaching columns, and the British suffer tremendous casualties. The only problem with that, though, is as the provincials are firing, they're starting to run out of ammunition. And the British finally take the fortification, and it's a hand-to-hand fight at that point. And most of the provincials are trying to skedaddle and get across Charlestown Neck as they're being fired upon. to get to the other side. It's a big loss for them, but at the same time, the British have lost so many dead, so many officers. It's a mess. It's a total mess.
The American Revolution has a million stories associated with it. Most of them are legends, myths, things that over the past 250 years have taken on a life of their own. And mostly it's because, most of the histories were written a generation after the events that actually happened. And so when you get to stories about like Bunker Hill, it's shrouded in a lot of mysteries and myths. One of the things is the Battle of Bunker Hill itself. It's actually the Battle of Breed's Hill. You think Bunker Hill and the flag with the evergreen on it and everything, Trumbull's painting, which was done decades later, all add to the mythos of the battle that occurred on the 17th of June, 1775.
Up until the Battle of Bunker Hill and really even following the events of Lexington and Concord, there was this pervasive opinion among the British military establishment that militiamen and colonials were not a serious threat. In fact, one British officer in the run-up to revolution remarked that he could march across the entire continent unscathed with just 5,000 men. And those kinds of suppositions were quickly put to rest following the really true bloodbath that was the assault on Bunker Hill by British infantry. The British suffered more than 900 casualties trying to take these defensive fortifications over 3 assaults. In fact, John Pitcairn, who famously leads the advance companies at Lexington and Concord, he's killed at Bunker Hill.
In Massachusetts, in New England for the most part, the rifle is not a popular arm. And it doesn't become so up until into the early 19th century. But in some of the southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, the rifled gun is a popular gun. A lot of Germans, people of Germanic descent, brought this over with them, and they're building these arms that have rifling that are using a tightly patched ball that eliminate a lot of the windage that the smoothbore gun has. And so these men form up and they march towards the siege of Boston, and they arrive with hunting frocks and face paint and these weird guns. And it's interesting to read some of the accounts between New Englanders and these guys from the South showing up. But one of the things that some of the accounts talk about are the fact that some of these guys could hit a British soldier, and some of these riflemen were putting a scare into the British with the distances that they were hitting. The provincials from New England, they see this stuff, but they still love their smoothbore gun. So that's where they really start to see the rifles for the first time. I mean, they've been around a little bit, but not in any amount or any quantity that they're gonna start to turn towards the rifle as opposed to the smoothbore.
The fights at Bunker Hill underscore the capability of these militiamen, even with smoothbore fowling pieces and other muskets of the time period, like the Longland pattern, like the Model 1728 Charlevilles. It shows what they were able to do in the face of the might of the British Army at this time. And it showed the British that this was not going to be a short fight, nor an easy one. And as the American Revolution develops, we'll see that there are evolutions in both the employment of arms as well as the type of arms themselves, as both the American colonists and the British realize what fighting is like on this continent.